So, Ogmandino, the author of the quote that you read, Shirley, I haven't heard Ogmandino's name for a long time. And I loved the passage about looking up the stars, but it also reminded me of one of the darkest moments of my life, my lives. Ogmandino. I was in college, and I decided that I needed to have a job in the summer that made a lot of money, and some of my dorm mates sold books in the summer, door to door. And they assured me that I could make thousands of dollars if I just tried this job out. And I hated this job. I just absolutely hated it. Putting pressure on people, going door to door, selling. The books were good. There was a variety of books, but I'm not a salesperson. And I just hated it. And it was one of the worst times in my life. Ogmandino, however, had written this book called The Greatest Salesman in the World. You guys know that book? It's a classic book on positive thinking, I think, but I could not get into it. It was this juxtaposition of this great inspiring thing trying to get me to do something that I absolutely could not do, which was sell books. And so I had a very trying, difficult time getting from southeastern Pennsylvania back through Nashville to turn in my sales kit because I thought I had to face up to the fact that I was a quitter, because they really schooled you in not quitting, and those who quit were failures. And I had to go back through Nashville by hitchhiking from Pennsylvania with 5 boxes, and I had lost my glasses, and so I was virtually doing this. So I was hitchhiking, and I luckily got to Nashville, where I spent the night in the bus station because my mother had wired me money to get from there to South Dakota after I was being humiliated by turning in my sales kit. Ogmandino brought back all those memories for me of being in the dark. It was a really hard time. So this is my follow-up today is from what I talked about last month is largely based on Barbara Brown Taylor's work, a book in particular called Learning to Walk in the Dark. Pair that along with Ogmandino, maybe, and it'll make sense to you. I don't know. Enlightenment. You've heard the word, right? Okay. We all know this word. I don't know if we all know what it means, but it's a term that we might know from spiritual journeys that we make. But somehow we are taught to see the light. It's suggested in that word. We are not necessarily taught in the same way to face the darkness. Enlightenment is not just a movement toward the light. It's also journeying toward and into the darkness. Darkness holds as many or perhaps more lessons than light. It is sometimes in the bleakest void that the divine is nearest. Religious institutions usually tell our most important stories with an emphasis on light. But God and darkness have been friends for a very long time, according to Barbara Brown Taylor. Biblical stories are, she says, one nighttime story after another. There is some great theology that has come out of our pleading for God to be the light in our darkness. For example, there are many songs that extol that light breaks the hold that darkness has on us. But many of us have been also religiously trained to avoid the darkness. As soon as the institutional church seized upon Scripture's words about God's act of creation, let there be light, it has then somehow managed to christen light as holy and condemn darkness to hell. The message has become, if you are in the dark, you are not somehow walking with God. But both literal and psychological darkness have much to teach. It is hard to imagine faith, for example, without the corresponding image of light. Light and faith seem to go together, but it is equally hard to imagine a world without darkness, right? It is impossible. Across cultures and religions, ancient creation stories reflect the reality that our lives are based on the movement in the heavens that creates half our time to be literally in the dark. Interesting. But avoidance of darkness is also not very hard to understand. It can be scary, especially for a child. And I wonder, when I think back, how much we actually create or we perpetuate a fear of darkness in our children. We leave lights on at night, not just for safety, but because of the monsters that dwell under the bed or in the closet or lurking, waiting to pounce on us in the darkness. It can be, now as an adult, not just as a kid, it can be creepy, right? To be out at night and hear the screech of a barred owl suddenly close by. Or a fox making some weird barking noises, and you might not even be sure what it is out there. They all know that we are there, and they see and they smell and they sense us, but we usually don't know that they are even there until they surprise you. They know our world, but we don't know their world. But perhaps there's a caution there that should be maintained also, because these days we're learning it might in fact be a mountain lion, right? Or if you are in Arizona, what was the most recent sighting in Arizona on a game cam? Anybody know? A jaguar caught on a game cam. So I don't really want to run into a jaguar or a mountain lion at night. So be careful, but don't be stupid. But you know, as we age, however, our fears of elicit a kind of darkness whose meaning is it can be both literal and metaphorical. A loved one has cancer. Sometimes unemployment happens to us. Perhaps the loss of a home. A child with an addiction, which is something that many of us have experienced. Unanswered pleas or prayers. They all scare us because, like literal darkness, we don't know what's out there. We don't know what's going to happen. And then when we think about death, along with the fear of the darkness of the grave, we don't know if there's anything more. And if there is, what will it be? Will it be light? Will it be warmth? Will it be peace, eternal? Or are we still afraid that it could be darkness and cold, or even the fires of hell forever? But that makes me wonder why we associate darkness with hell anyway. With something we've been taught. The stories and the teachings from our past echo in our minds. But the ancients, I think, had what could be an advantage over us. Our lives are now filled with artificial light. Many call it light pollution. Just go up the hill, up Quincy Hill some night and look out over Houghton and Hancock and see how much light has increased over time. So much so that it disrupts our natural rhythms, our body rhythms. Literal darkness is not something we know how to deal with. And so when we add spiritual and psychological and emotional challenges, we lump them in with darkness, and we do the best we can to avoid them. We run from them. We're taught to get over our fears, to fix them, to do whatever it takes to be less in the dark. Barbara Brown Taylor suggests that we turn toward and into darkness instead of away from it. So another story that goes back, this was after I graduated from college. I worked at a Lutheran camp and environmental ed field center in the southeast corner of New York State. I got to kind of go back to that area and redeem a little bit of my book selling stuff by doing something that I cared about. at a place called Koinonia. It was very close to the Delaware Water Gap area. In the fall season, however, I was there for summer and a fall. In the fall season, 3rd through 6th graders would come from inner city New York and parts of New Jersey for an environmental education component through their public school. Kids from inner city New York and New Jersey, 3rd through 6th graders, many of them had literally never been in the dark. Well, our location at Koinonia was a large acreage, used to be a farm, dirt roads and forests and fields, and it was very dark at night. And we would take those kids out on night hikes. And because we were staff in our 20s, we sometimes did inappropriate things to frighten them. We didn't need to make up stories about what was out there. We did, but we didn't need to because those kids were already afraid. But of course, we played on some of those fears, and so it was common to be walking around at night on these trails and on these dirt roads with 10 or more kids hanging on you, literally climbing on you as we walked in the dark. It was great fun, but for us staff, it was great fun. I would like to talk to some of those kids again someday and find out how much we traumatized them. But we learned a lot about the stars at the same time because we could see the stars in the darkness. So there is a risk to being in the dark. There's a lot of them perhaps, but it takes a certain discipline to, for example, to not quickly run back inside your house when owls are making strange sounds or coyotes are yipping just in the valley right across your backyard. One of the risks of being in the dark is that we must somehow admit that we are not and we cannot be in control of everything in our lives, especially in the dark. The other night, we have barred owls all around our house, and we were standing outside not too long ago, about a month ago, in the night, and all of a sudden this barred owl just screeched. Right? It was about 10 feet away in a tree, and we had no idea it was there. That was interesting. It was funny. The ancient mystics understood that darkness holds a divine mystery. Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light, things that have saved my life over and over again, so that there is really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as I need light." Well, there are great stories about darkness as the setting for humanity's closest encounters with the divine. Last month I mentioned some biblical stories, but there are more. God appeared to Abraham in the night and promised him descendants more numerous than the stars. The Exodus from Egypt happened initially at night. They fled at night. God met Moses, the story says, in the thick darkness on top of Mount Sinai to hand down the 10 Commandments. Mary and Joseph were visited by an angel at night. And Jesus was born beneath a star and resurrected or born again in the darkness of a tomb. Barbara Brown Taylor asks a simple question. If we turn away from darkness on principle, doing everything we can to avoid it because there is simply no telling what it contains, isn't there a chance that we are running away from God? And the next she says, a walk in the dark, literal and psychological, emotional or spiritual, can lead us to wisdom and deliver us from fear by inviting its presence so we know what is there. Now that's plenty to think about, but I want to make a shift here to a subtle nuance that is suggested by darkness. Taylor says that we have come to require that religion, as typically given to us, includes a precondition for finding. Religion, finding. And here I would equate light with the certainty of seeing. You know, when you think of light, you think of seeing, and thus finding, or knowing, being enlightened by knowing something. Seek and you shall find. I mean, it's a great thing to think about. But darkness challenges us by stripping us of the precondition of knowing anything with a lasting certainty, that if we seek, we will discover the light and we will find. So try to hang in there with me, because this is really a subtle shift. Darkness challenges our very foundation by eroding the idea that we will find something and replaces it with the possibility that instead of finding, we might be found. This is the difference, one of the differences, I think, between faith and belief. Belief gives us a sureness until our beliefs are challenged and they are found wanting or lacking. Belief gives us assurance that light will illumine our darkness, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But our lives and our beliefs can be sometimes overwhelmed by the darkness that often happens on the journeys that we make in life. Sometimes we become lost. And faith, I think, is just the opposite. Faith is the experience not of finding, but of being found. And faith might not happen to us or find us until we acknowledge the darkness of our lives. The Israelites had to flee into the darkness of the wilderness. Moses had to enter a cloud of darkness to find or to be found by God, or to find God too. Jesus had to die so that everything he stood for, everything he was, could take root in the darkness of a tomb. And this probably makes more sense than anything. I recently heard from someone, family member, who is in jail, language that suggests that sometimes a person is not arrested or incarcerated, but actually rescued from a situation so that new life, new possibility could arise. And I've also come to learn more and more that this is also the seed deep within the 12-step process of AA. Enter the darkness, because at times it's necessary to grow. Religion, that which we practice, is a great thing, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't want or need it for a variety of reasons. But at a certain point, we might be faced with a recognition that on our end, religion is an attempt to understand that which is really not understandable. And also that our sureness in what we believe can close as many doors as it opens. There's a great Quaker saying, "Way will open." Way will open. In other words, if you get yourself out of the way, sort of a let go and let God kind of practice, way will open. Now, I once heard Parker Palmer say that in the midst of an existential crisis of his own, a deep depression, he discovered from an elder that way will open before you sometimes means way closes behind you. We typically look for open doors, but his insight was that sometimes the doors are not obviously opening before us, but if we look back, doors have closed behind us. And they help us know which way to go, sometimes more in the darkness. Especially when times are challenging, our beliefs can all too easily become dogmatic and lead to self-righteousness and exclusiveness, when sureness and certainty lead to a crisis, when a certainty of belief can actually break us, then we find ourselves getting in our own way because of what we believe. But faith, I think, is altogether different because it is less certain. Faith is harder than belief. Sometimes that which we call God or Spirit actually eludes us. It avoids being found, it avoids being handled or possessed by any one of us or any of our religions, but it does invite our simple acceptance of uncertainty. It invites being experienced. To some, it actually invites being found. The truths found within all the wonderful stories and religious traditions are not about finding as much as they are about experiencing, seeking, and remaining open to being found in different ways while allowing us to enter and even immerse ourselves in spiritual practice. It also allows us to move out from under it. Faith allows us to move out from under the beliefs when we find ourselves in a crisis, when we find ourselves in the dark. It is faith that can help us suspend those beliefs for as long as we need to be found. No, I think we understand today that many religions and denominations are facing a time of crisis. For many, the beliefs that we have inherited, the proverbial faith of our fathers, have worn out, leaving us in the dark. And it's interesting to note that many of the religious denominations of which we are a part are actually reformations. They are reformations. They are adaptations of beliefs that change over time because they need to change over time. They need to be reformed. But darkness can be and often is scary when we don't know what we will find or what will find us. Seekers like Buddha meditated in the caves of northern India. Muhammad received the Quran in a cave outside of Mecca. St. Francis prayed in a tiny grotto near Assisi that I'm imagining was very dark at night and maybe even during the day. So perhaps we all need to find a place where light is muted, a cave of our own choosing in which we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable, metaphorically or literally, in the dark. It is then that we will learn to navigate perhaps by the stars of the sky that we can only see when it is dark. Let me say one more thing. There is another risk that needs to be named. If we find ourselves in the dark, we may not find what we want. And that can be disconcerting. That can be frightening. The best example I know is the terrified King Saul who sought out the witch of Endor at night because his armies were surrounded by his Philistine enemies. And the witch instructed him to eat, to get up, and to go out into the battle that he feared. And he did. And he died. He was killed in battle. And here I would just close with Barbara Taylor's wisdom when she says or writes this. If you are in the dark, it does not mean that you have failed and that you have taken some terrible misstep. In simple terms, our questions, our doubts, and maybe even our sense of God's absence are not signs of our lack of faith, but opportunities to learn what faith actually is. Being found or moving with the Spirit as it blows you where it will. Darkness can give way to truths that shine brighter than the sun. Thank you. Our next song, Make Me a Channel of Your Peace, might be new to people, but I think you'll